So if we take a look at numbers on a number line, we have a couple things that we want to consider. How do we order numbers, and how do we work between the different options to compare the numbers? And then finally, what are the order of numbers on a number line, which might seem silly, but for example, in this first problem, my students really struggle with negative values. So they're fine with knowing that this goes 0 and 1, but if we're going in the negative direction, we need to know which way we count. Okay, so this being 1 is no problem. However, going negative, our numbers sort of go backwards. So this is -1 and then -2. So our C value is here, our B value is here. If we want -1.5, so again, my students are often tempted to say, oh, -1, but I want half of it, right? This is more negative. So we want a -1 and then another half negative. So this would be our -1.5. Now our +1/2 is halfway in between 0 and 1, so our +1/2 is here. Now this is a pretty basic structure, so now we're going to look at one that's a little bit more complex. So all of these are going to fall in between 4 and 5, and we want to get them in the correct order. Usually my students' preference is to compare all of these as decimals, which is fine. We should now know how to do that in our calculator. So 4.5 is already a decimal. So if we want to do 4 1/3, you can type this in as a fraction and then do your second PRB. So this is 4.3 repeating. We can do 17 divided by 4, which is going to be 4.25. And then we can check the square root of 24. Now, this is an irrational number, so this is never going to repeat, but we can at least give ourselves enough. This would really round up, I guess, if we look at the 7, so I guess I'll keep going, to sort of compare the values. Okay, so if we want to find the value that's closest to 4, right, we're looking at this next decimal point. So here is our next smallest number. So 4.25, that's a quarter of the way. So we want to be about a quarter of the way across. So here's our 17/4. Now 4.3 repeating is just a little bit larger. So don't put your 4.3 repeating all the way over here, right? It's just a little bit larger. So here's our 4 1/3. Our 4.5 is going to be about halfway. Okay, and if you're like, oh man, I don't know that 0.5 is halfway, that's 4.5. So if you need to change it into a fraction to think about that as being half. Okay, and 4.8, okay, now we're going to be way over here closer to 5. So here's our square root of 24. Now, you might not have the exact spot marked on the number line, but what I'm looking for is that you have values closer together that should be closer together, and values that are farther away, further away. Whether or not you're exactly halfway in the middle of the number line, that's not going to be as important. Okay, so let's take a look at number 3, example 3 here. So same thing, my students usually prefer to look at this. Now another trick is that you can just do 2 divided by 5 to see that that's 0.4. So this would be a -2.4 if you want to go that route. So here we have a negative square root of 5. So that's going to be a -2.236. We have a -2.3. And if we do 7 divided by 3, we'll get a 2.3 repeating. So this one's definitely a lot closer in our values. And we're also going negative. So in general, just to think about our number line, as we move this direction, our numbers get more negative, which means we'll have like a -2.1, a -2.5, a -2.9, right? It feels a little bit backwards of a normal number line because negatives are going in the reverse order. Okay, they're that sort of mirror image. So if we just take a look up here, we have a 4 as our first decimal point, a 2, a 3, and a 3. So we definitely know that this is our next value working from our right-hand side. Okay, so here's our negative square root of 5. Now, these both have a 0.3 next, but keep in mind that this is really a 0.3 repeating. This has nothing next. So if we have a 0 and we have a 3, this 0 is smaller, right? So it's going to be our next one. Not that much further away from this. So here's our negative 2.3. And really close to that is going to be our negative 2.3 repeating. Oops, that's really our negative 7 over 3. And then not even that far away from it, right? I'm even off a little bit because I'm going to be past halfway, is going to be our negative 2 and 2/5 because that's our negative 2.4.